We've arrived at the end of our day, and so I want to welcome back up a few of the folks who helped make all this possible. We've got John Gorman, Luis Campos, and Robin Scheffler. And, you know, I think this... it was nice in this very last panel of, you know, storytellers, journalists, playwrights. We started to open up the question of how 1976 really does speak to this moment we're in now. And so I thought it would be nice, as you know, the curators of this event today, for you all to reflect on that directly. Let's say OpenAI and Anthropic were located right here in one of these glass towers in Kendall Square. What do you think will be going on over at Cambridge City Hall? Or put more broadly, you know, what is that potential for local publics, citizens, constituents to get involved and get engaged in this issue at a local or even state level that can be meaningful with these technologies and issues that can seem so much bigger than one little hamlet here in Massachusetts?
So if I may make a confession, I have been working on this production with Michael, John, and Luis for a long time, and I know a lot about the history of biology. I love it. I know less about AI, and I think like everybody in the last year or so, I've become more aware of it, and I've been listening to news coverage and various things, and I will admit that I see a lot of resonances in the sense that I think very often there's a suggestion that as a member of the public, which I am very much in relation to AI, your options are either denial or acquiescence. So there's not really, it's inevitable and you can't do anything, or you can be, you know, scratching stuff out with a stone in your cave. Is that sort of how it feels? And what I love about the 1976 moment is that there's an option C, and that digging into the sort of historical detail and the way people acted in Cambridge provides a new menu of ways that we could walk, you know, down to City Hall today, in Cambridge, in Palo Alto, in Lowell, Massachusetts, and talk about the issues that data centers are posing to communities and the work that AI is being thought of as doing.
Luis?
It's interesting. I feel like paying attention to histories like this helps to expand our imagination. Which sounds weird and constrained, because you think of history as being constrained, things happened a certain way. But in fact, we have kind of maybe inherited narratives that we think about how things happened, and going into the depth of it kind of reveals for us indeed just how human and how messy it was. And so I think that way it breaks us out of what we think is the way things work, that, for instance, technology comes first and social consequences come after. And I think this story shows that in fact there's a whole lot of how the socialness played out that mattered for what happened afterwards, and it's really not about the technology at all. And if we frame it that way, that challenges a common sense framing that many of us might otherwise have, and also opens up the possibility for thinking what our action might be. I think another thing is that it also makes us feel maybe less lonely, that we're not always the only ones surfing at the edge of the new, and that there have been endless other moments when people have been surfing at the edge of the new. And in fact, that's a very familiar situation that we're always finding ourselves in again and again. And I think there's ways in which kind of reminding ourselves of that, that not everything has to be the first time we've encountered something, but in fact there's lots of resonances, lots of tools to think with across time, are ways that we can, I think, open up our imagination by using the history.
There's something weirdly comforting about watching those videos from the 70s and seeing how everyone is panicked about this thing that I can say, oh, I think it was actually okay, everyone. And that's not to say that everything we're panicking about now will also be okay. That is not necessarily the lesson. But just to know that there was that kind of panic before, that we're not alone here. We're not the first here. Michael, John, yeah.
Yeah, and I also think if you cast your mind back to 1976, there was a sense that science was the man back then. That you'd had the Manhattan Project, you'd had a sense that the scientific institutions were powerful. Vellucci was at war with Harvard, and there was a sense that science was really in this quite dominant position.
Jonathan had pretty long hair. It looked like
Jonathan had amazing hair, and we have, but now we have a situation where I think we can come back to OpenAI and Anthropic, but I do think that if you think of the city of Cambridge, there is a really powerful argument for, along with discussions around potholes and cycle lanes that are really important, right now we have a different challenge. We have a challenge where higher education is under siege, where science is under attack, and where a city which has the highest concentration of Nobel laureates per person in the world really has something really important to defend. So I think that's a conversation that I think we urgently need to have in the city of Cambridge. With regards to AI, it is, as was said by the panelists earlier, a little bit more difficult to grasp because the issues are so global and so except for the NIMBYism around data centers and so on, which is important, but there's still other AI issues that need that local discussion. And I thought today was really interesting to hear the conversations around these kind of distributed local conversations. And they don't always need to be in that sort of legalistic context of discussing a moratorium, but really to have the conversation. I mean, we hear a lot from Sam Altman with his 5 stages of AI, and this is the plan. We're going to go from chatbots to agents to reasoning to science, and then ultimately to AIs running companies and perhaps governments. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So we have a lot of that vision, but we don't have a lot of conversations with the public about what are alternative, imaginative visions for how AI could be useful to society. So I think a little bit like what Drew Endy said around these libraries, this idea of distributed places where those public conversations, those urgent conversations can happen, and where voices that are not usually part of the narrative are amplified. I think that's something that we urgently need, whether it's in City Hall or in the mall or in another location. So I think that's a real lesson from 76, is we urgently need those spaces for public dialogue.
Yeah. And I think there's just this constant reminder in the story of 76 that technology and progress is not something that happens to us. You know, it is not some passive force that is just coming and we can just be acquiescent or in denial, but it is something that we choose, and that we do have voice in that.
Yeah, if anything, I think the questions around how 76 relates to AI are more so than many forms of biological research in the 70s, because back in the 70s, if you listen to, Councillor Clem, there are questions that pop up like, why don't you just do this out in the prairie? Why can't you just go do this far away? And that's very imaginable as an alternate scenario for recombinant DNA, because the products that are being made are scientific papers that can travel, or pharmaceuticals which travel very easily over long distances, and later on Boston becomes good as a transportation hub for companies like Genzyme. But the model of making AI ubiquitous requires data centers and processing power to also be ubiquitous, which means it's got to come to every community. In that sense, sorry to riff on one of your lines, Luis, more communities are going to be more like Cambridge in relation to AI than they were into biology, because many communities are going to be making the decision to bring it close in and to coexist with it and balance its general impact with the local sort of proximity to its infrastructure.
I'm also thinking about on that just the power of place that we've been hearing. We've been referring to being here in this space, in this town, right, in all these ways. But I also think, it must have really mattered to have a very hot evening in the City Hall chambers like we're about to have, right? And as these performances are going on, right? That must have mattered. It mattered that these folks worked in the same departments and lived in the same city, were in close proximity, talking and engaging with each other all the time. And so one of the things I really want to think with more is, intellectuals think intellectual things matter, but lots of other things matter too, and the ways that we live and how close we are to the people around us, and the fact that this biolab is right next to the daycare center and the rest of the neighborhood, right? There's a lot of things there that are not about the cost, the risk-benefit analysis, right? They're about senses and feelings and relations that we have with each other.
David Clem earlier invoked the great Cantabrigian Tip O'Neill, and of course the motto he lived by was all politics is local. And I think this is a reminder of that too, that even AI and recombinant DNA, all these things are local. Thank you to you all, Michael, John, Robin, Luis, for making all this possible. Thank you to everyone for coming out today. And I really hope that everyone has a chance to check out the play that Patrick and company have been working on, No Recombination Without Representation, at Cambridge City Hall. So thank you all. Keep the conversation going.
Thank you.